We hear it's 106 degrees here in Arizona. We hear that the fire marshal's already having to turn folks away who want to be right in here celebrating this great country with us. But the man who turned up the heat on the deep state, who exposed the liars and the corrupt officials, is the greatest acting director of national intelligence in America's history, my man, Rick Grenell. So, Rick, as you know, when we first called this Russian nonsense a coup, we had all the media, all the Democrats, and even some of the Republicans fighting against us. And it was folks like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and Andy Biggs from right here in Arizona fighting to make sure we got the truth out. So many people, Rick, have talked about what they have believed, what they have perceived, what they think they've analyzed, but you actually got to go behind the scenes and see the information. What is the scariest thing that you saw as you were performing this job for the country, and what motivated you to get the truth out to America?
Well, first of all, let me just say thanks to you, thanks to Charlie, and I have to say thank you to all of you, because we have felt your support. We have felt your support, and it does not go without saying that we cannot do these jobs without your support. So thank you very much. Your voices on social media are incredibly important. And when attacked in Washington, it was always comforting to go and see the American people and to see the American people and how they were responding. You know, Matt, I don't think that we have a fight in Washington between Republicans and Democrats anymore. I think we have a fight between Washington and the rest of the country. And the games in Washington and what people do in Washington, when I read the transcripts, the 52 transcripts from people who testified under oath in the House Intelligence Committee, when I read what they said under oath, and I compared it to what they said on MSNBC and CNN, it made me sad. It made me sad because our country for 3 years was sold a Russian hoax. Now, make no mistake, the Russians use propaganda on every election. They try to get us to fight. They will say the opposite on social media of whatever you're saying. If you're a Christian, they're going to inflame your views. If you're a gun owner, they're going to inflame your views. This is the game and the tactics of the Russians. And to say that they interfered in our election is much different than saying that they interfered in our debate about the election, largely on social media. And that line was blurred for 3 years. Everyday Americans thought that the election was stolen, or that somehow we would see votes changed. Nothing, there is no evidence to that whatsoever. But what we did see are the Russians pushing forward propaganda to get us to fight. And boy, have they been successful. They spent a little bit of money, and the American media followed them. They try to get us to fight about everything. And that's where we have to draw the line. And when I read these transcripts and I saw the people that knew Susan Rice and Samantha Power say under oath, I see nothing. There is no collusion. I see no evidence. Go read it. It's on the DNI website. Go read it for yourself. Under oath, they would say one thing, and on television, they would say another. That is wrong. And we have to stand up, and we have to get our country back. We are not a country that fights like we are right now between each other. If I can say one thing that you need to remember when you're on social media, make sure that you know who you're talking to. Because if you don't know who that person is and they don't have that many followers, it just might not be somebody that you need to fight with. I think
Rick, you're telling these folks not to fight with folks on social media? No ambassador in America's history has fought more on social media than Rick Grenell. Rick, do you understand what irony is?
I always know who I'm fighting with, Matt. And I do think that you have to fight. I think you have to correct the record. It's not so much fighting, it's correcting the record. When you know something, correct the record.
So, Rick, as we were working in the Congress to try to expose the crooks and criminals and hold them accountable, we faced substantial resistance. And as I travel the country in Texas and Arizona and my beloved Florida, the number one question I get is, when are they going to jail for what they did to our president and our country? And so, Rick, my question is this. What do you believe is the strongest evidence when comparing the transcripts and the footnotes and all the information we got out that crimes were committed and that people should be held accountable?
Well, let's make one thing clear. There were several people early on that raised red flags about this information. There were several people internally that stood up and said, this isn't true. The Steele dossier is being manipulated. The Russians were manipulating some of it. People knew, and their comments were classified and pushed aside. And what we've been able to do is to find those early warning signs that were pushed aside and ignored. And that's where I think we make a difference. There were those in Congress who could see the early warning signs. We've uncovered through declassification and through unmaskings the exact people who were trying to manipulate the narrative. Now look, when I was at DNI and I decided that it was really important to show who unmasked between the election of Donald Trump and the inauguration of Donald Trump. The reason I chose that period is because that's a really important period. That's when we know who the President of the United States is, the next one. And there's a transition. The reason we don't have an inauguration the day after the election is because we're the greatest country in the world, and you need a transition period. You need a peaceful transition of power. By the time we got to Inauguration Day, there were 67 Democrats that refused to go to the peaceful transition of power. They started out refusing to have a peaceful transition of power. That's scary. And that's what we have to push back on.
Where do you think the most corrupt power centers were in the Obama administration?
Look, I think there's no question that this narrative early on was woven not only with political types, but with friendly media types. The Washington, D.C. national security reporters are still digging into pits that they know that they can't get out of. Like the WMD of years ago, when we realized that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Many news outlets put new teams, fresh eyes on the story to evaluate, what did our reporters do wrong? How did we get it so wrong? That hasn't been done. We don't see independent journalists from news organizations trying to evaluate how their own outlet got it wrong. That needs to happen, and we need to hold the editors accountable.
Amen.
So I think to answer your question, it's a combination of the political types, the media types. This is why I go back to the fact of the matter is we have a fight between Washington and those who want it bigger, better, bolder, and those in America who want their own lives to be more important than the lives of congressmen and senators.
Though your time as acting DNI and ambassador to Germany have concluded, you continue to serve this president with sound counsel and advice. And this Saturday, You've got the heads of government from Kosovo, from Serbia coming to the White House to have a meeting to try to bring some lasting peace to an area that is desperate for us. Give us the first preview of coming attractions as to your meeting with the president and these heads of government at the White House on Saturday.
Thanks for that question. I'll try to be brief. It's a very important meeting on Saturday. President Trump and his team continues to try to solve problems around the world, and we've got one between Kosovo and Serbia. On Saturday, the two presidents of Kosovo and Serbia will come together and sit down at the White House. What we're going to try to do, instead of trying to push forward on political issues that seem intractable, we are going to do what the Trump administration does best, which is to talk about freedom of commerce, economics, jobs, try to be able to negotiate agreements so that the two countries can start trading and jobs can be created, and leave the political stuff to step two. That first step of trying to create an exciting economy is exactly what President Trump knows how to do, and that's what we're going to try to do on Saturday.
I believe that President Trump is the first American president in my lifetime not to launch us off into some new war. And it's nice that President Trump is actually trying to end wars, not start them. You were ambassador to Germany, and recently President Trump made the statement loud and clear that America is not the world's policeman, and we are not the world's piggy bank. We won World War II, and we're bringing some of our troops from Germany back home to our country, and we're going to continue to invest in our people. Now, Rick, it was disgusting that we had Republicans in the United States Congress criticizing our president for this decision to bring our troops back to our country. What would be your message to my fellow Republicans in the Congress who would dare take exception with the transformational leadership of our president on the world stage?
This is such an important issue, and I hope that everybody gets involved with this, because if you count the rotational troops and the permanent troops in Germany, we have 52,000 troops currently in Germany. What President Trump said is, why can't we lower it to 25,000? What I would say to Republicans who still want to send our men and women overseas, 25,000 troops in Germany sounds like a good number to me. If you want to make the case that we still have to send more troops overseas, I think you should stand up and make that case to the American people. Because I'll tell you one thing, the Germans, I never got mad at the Germans when they would say, we don't want to buy attack helicopters or ships. We want to buy kindergarten programs and new schools. And I would say, exactly, I don't blame you for that. You probably shouldn't have signed up for the NATO agreement where you said that you would pay 2%. But be careful what you teach Americans, because when you teach Americans that you deserve and they deserve the best schools instead of attack helicopters, you're going to have a real problem with bringing the troops home, because Americans also want the money spent domestically. We also want new bridges. We also want new schools.
Yeah. I don't think that it's an improper thing to say we'd like to rebuild America before we rebuild Kandahar. So, staying in Germany, Rick, we remember the absurd allegations of those in the fake news about, oh, President Trump's a Russian agent. We've handed over America to Russia. Your work in Germany was some of the strongest work to push back against Russia, to reinforce our values and principles. Take a moment and just reflect on how we instilled an America First foreign policy through your work in Germany, and particularly in the energy space.
Look, I spent 8 years at the UN, and I will tell you there's only one country in the entire world that gets in trouble for fighting for itself, and it's the United States of America. Every country fights for itself. Every country pushes forward what they want. Every country has diplomatic meetings where they say, here are the 10 things that we want the United States to do. It's called diplomacy. It's exactly what every country does to us. But when suddenly we turn it around and say, instead of paying for 52,000 troops in Germany, how about 25,000 and you stop buying Russian oil, Russian gas? Because the Russian gas Nord Stream 2 pipeline, remember this, we were fine with Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 2 went too far. Too much gas going into Germany at the same time that they weren't paying their NATO bill. So I have to tell you, we were very clear to say, don't feed the beast while you're making the Americans defend you against the beast.
So, Rick, one thing that you and I have in common is that we can occasionally be a little based on social media. We can occasionally share our perspective and our views with a little bit of edge. And I just love it when all the Clinton people and Obama people and even some of the Bush people would just clutch their pearls and say, oh, how could Rick Grenell get on Twitter and share what he actually thinks? How could he put pressure on other countries through social media? And so the question is this: as these patriotic, brave young Americans seize their rightful destiny in leadership in this country, is this the new normal? Are we now in a space where we can leave no lie unresponded to, no claim unconfronted? And do you believe that getting on social media and sharing our views is precisely the way we keep the fire burning in this great movement?
I absolutely agree. And don't ever forget that freedom of the press is really, the spirit of that is about getting information to the public. Back in the day, when we didn't have social media, you had to go through the media. You had to sit down and tell your story, and they would go back to their newsroom and they would decide what they wanted to say. They had the filter. And just like many industries, the banking industry, a whole bunch of industries have been transformed through technology. So has journalism. The information needs to go to the people. The information is not to be just shared with the media and filtered by the media. The media need to remember that the information is about the people. It's for the people. And when you have social media and you have a president who gets on and speaks directly to the American people without the filter, that should be celebrated.
Amen. There was a proposal discussed with one of my congressional colleagues that after Rick had gone and cleaned house within our intelligence space, we should just make him the acting director for a few weeks of every apparatus of the government and make sure we magnify this government for our people. Rick said no to that, but let's make a little news here, Rick. We are obviously going to re-elect this president in 2020, right? And when we do, I am tired of the weak voices on the national stage. We want America First patriots in the positions that represent our great country. And so after President Trump is reelected, if he asks you, will you serve as the Secretary of State for the United States of America in a second term of the Trump administration? The deep state won't know what hit them.
I don't think I can answer that.
Ladies and gentlemen, get on your feet and give it up for the declassifier-in-chief, Ambassador Rick Grenell.